When he ordered my banishment, the entire world fell silent. I saw his gaze pierce through my body as if I were just a shadow, the wind, nothing. The ladies chuckled softly as I knelt on the cold marble, begging him to believe me. But the Alpha King just turned his back, and the sound of his footsteps echoing through the hall was the sentence that sealed my fate. Before we dive into this story, leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. I was not born to be seen. From childhood, I learned that my existence was a favor granted by the kindness of others, a fragile concession that could be withdrawn at any moment. My mother died in childbirth, and my father, a common soldier who never returned from the war, left me in the care of a distant aunt who saw me as a burden. At 7, I was sent to the castle to serve, not for talent or beauty, but because extra mouths are expensive and poverty is unforgiving. I learned early to walk in the shadows, to lower my eyes when raised voices cut through the air, to disappear the moment I was no longer needed. The castle was a world of gold and marble, a place where every column told stories of ancient glories and every tapestry displayed battles won by men I never knew. I cleaned those endless corridors, scrubbed the floors until my knees bled, and polished the silver that adorned the tables where I would never sit. The other maids ignored me, seeing in me just another shadow among many. I didn't mind. I preferred silence to the cruelty disguised as companionship. It was on a winter night that everything began. The snow was falling heavily outside, transforming the world into a white, silent blanket. I was carrying firewood for the main hall's fireplace when I felt him for the first time. Not his words, but his presence. The Alpha King had something magnetic about him, a force that needed no announcement. He simply entered a room, and all eyes would bow in his direction, like sunflowers seeking the sun. I dropped one of the logs, and the sound echoed through the empty hall. He turned his face toward me. I will never forget that look. It wasn't one of contempt, as I had expected, nor of indifference. It was something deeper, more unsettling, as if he could see through my skin and perceive not the insignificant maid I pretended to be, but something more. Something not even I knew. I stood paralyzed, my heart beating so hard I thought he could hear it. He said nothing, just continued to watch me, and then, with an almost imperceptible gesture, he waved for me to leave. I obeyed, of course, but something had changed. I could feel it. In the days that followed, I began to notice him watching. Not obviously, never obviously. But I felt the weight of his gaze as I crossed the corridor, as I served wine during the banquets, as I folded the sheets in the royal chambers. It was as if an invisible current connected us, pulling me closer even as my mind screamed for me to run. He was the king, the absolute alpha of these lands, the man before whom dukes and generals knelt. And I was nothing, less than nothing, but the heart knows no hierarchies. I began to dream of him every night. Dreams in which his deep voice resonated in my ear, in which his hands touched my face with a tenderness I had never known. I would wake up sweaty, confused, ashamed. This was wrong, dangerous, forbidden. I knew it, we all knew it. The stories of maids who dared to look too long, to desire too much, always ended the same way. Humiliation, banishment, death. But desire does not ask for permission to exist. It simply grows, silent and devastating, until it consumes everything. The first time he touched me was in a dark corridor, far from the watchful eyes of the court. I was carrying a candelabra, and I saw him emerge from the shadows like an apparition. My first instinct was to step back, to bow, to disappear, but he reached out and held my wrist firmly, not with brutality but with authority. I dropped the candelabra. Hot wax dripped onto the stone floor, forming small golden rivers that shimmered in the moonlight, filtering through the narrow window. He pulled me closer, and then, for the first time, I heard his voice directed at me. "You're trembling," he said, and it wasn't a question. It was a statement. I was trembling indeed, from fear, from desire, from something I couldn't name. He raised his free hand and touched my face, his rough fingers gliding over my cheek as if wanting to memorize every contour. His gaze was dark, intense, predatory. I should have run. I should have knelt and begged for forgiveness for existing in that moment. But I did none of that. I just looked back at him, and in that charged silence, something broke between us. "What is your name?" he asked, though I was sure he already knew. The court's whispers were persistent, and nothing escaped the king's ears. I hesitated. Revealing my name seemed to make it all too real, too dangerous. But there was something in his eyes that made it impossible to lie. "Elena," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He repeated my name slowly, savoring each syllable, and the sound of my own identity coming from his lips was the most intimate thing I had ever experienced. He didn't kiss me that night. Not yet. He just let me go and disappeared back into the shadows, leaving me alone in the corridor with a racing heart and trembling legs. I picked up the fallen candelabra with shaky hands and returned to my quarters. But sleep wouldn't come. I lay on the narrow bed staring at the cracked ceiling, trying to understand what had happened. Had I imagined it all? Was this just the delusion of a lonely mind seeking meaning where there was none? But it wasn't. In the following days, he began to summon me to his chambers. Always late at night, always in secret. I went, of course, because refusing an alpha is not an option. But it wasn't just obedience that moved me. It was something deeper, more frightening. I wanted to be there. I wanted to hear his voice, feel his touch, to exist for someone, even if only in the shadows. The conversations began innocently. He would ask about my life, my childhood, my fears. I answered hesitantly at first, but slowly I began to open up. I told him about the mother I never knew, about the cold nights in the servants' quarters, about the constant emptiness I carried inside my chest. He listened in silence, those dark eyes fixed on me, and for the first time in my life, I felt that someone truly saw me. Not as a maid, not as an obligation, but as a person. He spoke too, though sparingly. He told me about the weight of the crown, about the impossible decisions he had to make, about the loneliness of being constantly surrounded by people who either feared him or wanted something from him. There was a sadness in his voice that surprised me. I had always imagined that kings lived in fulfillment, that power banished all kinds of suffering. But there, in that room lit only by the faint light of candles, he seemed just a man. A tired, lonely man searching for something he couldn't even name. On the 5th night, he kissed me. It was sudden, desperate, as if something inside him had finally broken. His hands held my face with an intensity that bordered on pain, his lips pressed against mine with a hunger that left me breathless. I didn't know what to do. I had never been kissed before. But my body reacted instinctively, my hands grabbing the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer. He groaned against my mouth, a low, animalistic sound that ignited something within me. When we finally separated, we were both panting. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed as if fighting against himself. "This is madness," he murmured, but he didn't let go. "I know," I replied, and it was true. We both knew this couldn't end well, that there were insurmountable barriers between us, social abysses that no desire, no matter how intense, could cross. But in that moment, neither of us cared. Weeks turned into months. Our secret nights became my only reason for existing. I floated through the days like a ghost, performing my duties on autopilot, counting the minutes until I could be back in his arms. He gave me a locket, a small piece of jewelry that had belonged to his mother. "Wear it always," he said, pressing the object into my palm. "So you remember you're not alone." I kept that locket as if it were the most precious thing in the world, hiding it under my tattered dress, feeling the cold metal against my skin like a promise. But secrets of this magnitude don't stay hidden forever. The court has eyes and ears in every corner, and whispers began to circulate. Timid at first, then bolder. The other maids looked at me with poorly disguised envy, the ladies of the court with open contempt. I tried to ignore it, but the weight of those gazes was crushing. I knew I was living on borrowed time, that sooner or later the truth would come out and everything would fall apart. The Queen Mother was the first to confront him. I heard the screams coming from the royal chambers on a grey afternoon, her shrill voice cutting through the castle's silence like a blade. "You are bringing shame to this family. A maid, a nameless nobody." He answered something I couldn't hear, but his tone was defensive, almost desperate. The argument lasted for hours, and when it finally ended, a heavy silence settled over the castle like the calm before the storm. That night he didn't summon me, nor the next. I spent 3 days in agony, each minute feeling like an eternity, imagining the worst. Had he given up on me? Had he finally caved to the pressure and decided I wasn't worth it? The pain of that possibility was physical, a black hole in the center of my chest that threatened to suck me in. Completely. On the fourth day, I received a summons. Not from him, but from the Queen Mother herself. My blood ran cold. I knew this could mean nothing good. I put on my best dress, which was really just the least tattered one, and walked to her chambers with trembling steps. The maids who passed me in the hallway averted their eyes, some with pity, others with cruel satisfaction. Everyone knew. The scandal was completely out. The Queen Mother was waiting for me, seated in an ornate armchair, a pearl necklace gleaming against her pale skin. She was a woman of cold, calculating beauty, the kind of person who saw other human beings only as pieces on a chessboard. When she saw me enter, a smile formed on her lips, but there was no warmth in the gesture, only victory. "So you are the creature who bewitched my son," she said, her voice dripping with venom. I lifted my chin, refusing to bow completely. "I bewitched no one," I replied, and though my voice trembled, there was truth in it. She laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "Of course not. Because a rat like you doesn't have that power. My son simply lost his head for a moment, a weakness all men have. But that ends today." She stood up, approaching me with measured steps. I could smell her expensive, cloying, suffocating perfume. "You will leave this castle," she continued, "and you will never return. If you try to contact him, if you dare to even speak his name, I will personally ensure that you are hunted down and eliminated. Understood?" My heart hammered in my chest. "I can't," I began, but she cut me off with a sharp gesture. "I don't care what you can or cannot do. You are nothing. You always have been, and you always will be. And if you think my son will come to your rescue, you are sorely mistaken. He has already agreed to your banishment." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. He agreed. He had given up on me without even a fight. The pain was unbearable, but I refused to cry in front of her. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. But before I could respond, the door burst open and he entered. His face was tense, his eyes blazing with a fury I had never seen. "Mother, what is happening here?" he roared, and though he wasn't yelling, his voice carried a tone of absolute command. The Queen Mother smiled, unperturbed. "Just solving a problem, my son. Nothing you need to worry about." He looked at me, and in that brief moment I saw something in his eyes. Hesitation, perhaps, or fear. But then his expression hardened, that mask of indifference he wore at court sliding back into place. "She has to go," he said finally, and those 3 words destroyed everything. The Queen Mother smiled triumphantly. Exactly what I was saying. I tried to speak, to plead, to explain, but my voice wouldn't come out. I just looked at him, searching for any sign that this was a mistake, a cruel farce. But he averted his eyes, unable to meet my gaze, and in that act of cowardice, I understood everything. To him, I was disposable. I always had been. Our entire story, all those nights, all those words whispered in the darkness, meant nothing in the face of the court's pressure. Guards entered the room, their heavy hands grabbing my arms. I didn't resist. What was the point? I just kept looking at him, memorizing every feature of the face I had loved and hated in equal measure. As they finally dragged me out, I heard the Queen Mother's voice, calm and satisfied. See how easy that was? Some problems solve themselves when you apply the right pressure. I was taken directly to the castle gates. The snow was beginning to fall, light at first, but soon turning into a storm. They threw me onto the road like trash, and the gates closed behind me with a boom that seemed to seal my fate. I stood there for a moment, the cold penetrating my thin clothes, the wind cutting my skin. Where could I go? Nowhere. What could I do? I didn't know. I walked aimlessly down the snow-covered road, each step heavier than the last. My bare feet were bleeding, leaving red marks on the white snow. But the physical pain was welcome. It distracted from the much worse pain tearing at my chest. How could I have been so foolish? How could I have believed that someone like him could truly love me? Kings don't love maids. They use them, discard them, and move on. Night fell and I kept walking. I had no idea how much time had passed or how far I was from the castle. Everything had become a blur of white and grey, my body moving on autopilot while my mind shattered. It was then that I stumbled, falling face first into the snow. I tried to get up, but my limbs wouldn't respond. The cold had seeped in so deeply that I couldn't feel anything anymore. I thought I would die there, freezing alone on the road, and a part of me thought that might be for the best. But fate had other plans. I woke up in a warm place, wrapped in rough blankets, a fire crackling nearby. An elderly woman was watching me with a worried expression. "You almost died," she said simply. "A few more minutes out there and you wouldn't have survived." I tried to speak, to thank her, but my throat was too dry. She offered me water, which I drank greedily, feeling the liquid go down and bring a little life back to me. "My name is Alina," the woman continued. "I've lived alone in this cottage for years. I saw you collapse on the road and couldn't leave you to die." My eyes filled with tears. "Why?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Why save me?" She smiled sadly, "Because everyone deserves a second chance, even those life has already condemned." I stayed with Alina for the following weeks. She didn't ask questions, didn't press for explanations. She just offered me shelter, simple food, and a space to heal. But some wounds don't scar over. I spent the nights awake, reliving every moment with him, every word, every touch. I hated myself for still missing him, for still wishing he would come for me. But he never came. It was Alina who noticed first. Her trained eyes observed the changes in my body that I hadn't even processed myself. "You are expecting a child," she said one morning, without preamble. I looked at her, confused then at my own belly. "Impossible," I murmured, but even as I denied it, a part of me already knew. The morning sickness, the constant fatigue, the subtle changes. I was pregnant with his child. The revelation destroyed me. I fell to my knees on the dirt floor and cried until I had no tears left. I was carrying the child of the man who had abandoned me, of the king who had thrown me away like trash. How could I raise this child alone, without resources, without support? How could I look at this child every day and not see his face haunting me? But Alina held my hand firmly. "You are stronger than you think," she said. "This baby is innocent. It doesn't matter how it was conceived. It doesn't matter who the father is. This child is yours and deserves a chance to live." Her words planted a seed of determination within me. She was right. I had been discarded, humiliated, destroyed. But this baby would be different. The months passed slowly. My belly grew, a constant reminder of what had happened. Alina taught me to sew, to cook, to survive with the bare minimum. I learned to turn pain into strength, hurt into resilience. Sometimes merchants would pass through the village bringing news from the castle. They said the king was to marry a noblewoman from a distant land, that the wedding would be grand, worthy of his position. Each piece of news was a stab, but I swallowed the pain and moved on. One night I heard horses approaching. I peeked through the window and saw royal guards. My blood ran cold. They had found me. Alina appeared by my side, her face pale. "You need to run, now." I grabbed only the locket he had given me, the only valuable object I owned, and slipped out the back door as the guards knocked on the front. I ran through the forest, my heavy belly making every movement torture, my heart racing with terror. I managed to hide among the dense trees, watching from afar as the guards searched Alina's cottage. I heard their voices, harsh and authoritarian, demanding information. She denied everything, of course, but they didn't believe her. I saw them drag her outside, saw them threaten her. I wanted to leave my hiding place, to give myself up to save her, but something held me back. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the baby I was carrying, about the heir the king would never know existed. I wandered through the forests for days, feeding on berries and stream water. My body was at its limit, every movement an agony, but I kept going, out of stubbornness, out of anger, out of a deep desire to survive just to prove him wrong, that I was more than the trash they had thrown away. I found shelter in an abandoned cave when the contractions began. The pain was unimaginable, tearing through me like iron claws. I was completely alone, with no help, no one to hold my hand. I thought I would die there, that both the baby and I would perish in that cold, dark cave. But then, in a last desperate effort, I pushed with all the strength I had left. The baby's cry filled the cave. A boy, healthy, strong, with dark hair like his. I held him against my chest, tears streaming down my face, a whirlwind of emotions suffocating me. Love, fear, anger, hope. "You will have everything I was denied," I whispered against his soft head. "You will be free, strong, recognized. One day, when the king looks at his throne and feels that emptiness, he will wonder what could have been." I named him Theron, warrior. because he had survived when all the odds were against us. Because he carried in his blood the strength of an alpha, even if that alpha would never acknowledge him. I wrapped him in the simple cloak Alina had given me and left the cave determined to build a life, even if from nothing. I found a small, distant village where no one asked questions. I found work in a tavern, cleaning tables and serving travelers. It wasn't much, but it supported us both. Theron grew strong and healthy, and every day with him was a blessing and a curse. A blessing because he was the purest and best thing in my life. A curse because every day he looked more like his father. The years passed. 3, 4, 5. Theron became a vibrant, curious child with that intense gaze that reminded me of him. I would tell him stories before bed, but never about his father. Not yet. How do you explain to a child that his father was a king who had abandoned us? That we were ghosts of a life that could never be? But the past does not stay buried forever. On an ordinary night, the tavern received unusual visitors. Nobles passing through with their fine clothes and well-groomed horses. I kept my head down, serving them discreetly, hoping they would soon be on their way. But then one of them looked at Theron, who was playing near the fireplace. "That boy," he said suddenly. His eyes... "He reminds me of someone." My blood ran cold. "No one important," I replied quickly. "Just my son." The nobleman kept looking, his eyes narrowed. "The resemblance is unsettling. If I didn't know better, I'd say he has noble blood." I smiled forcedly. "Nonsense. We are simple people." But the seed of suspicion had been planted. In the following days, I noticed strangers watching, asking questions. I knew it was only a matter of time until the truth reached the wrong ears. We needed to disappear again, to start over somewhere else. Always running, always hiding. This was my life now. One night, after putting Theron to sleep, I sat by the window looking at the stars. Did he ever think of me? On lonely nights, when the crown was too heavy, did he remember the maid he had loved and destroyed? Or was I just a footnote in his story, forgotten and insignificant? "It doesn't matter," I whispered to the night. Because I had something he would never have. I had Theron. And one day, when he grew up and knew the truth, maybe he would decide what story to write himself. Whether he would seek the father who abandoned him or build his own legacy, free from the chains of royalty. I spent the following years teaching Theron everything I could. To read, to write, to fight with a wooden sword I managed to trade for. He absorbed everything with frightening ease, as if knowledge were natural, something that already existed inside him just waiting to be awakened. There were moments when I watched him train and saw in him the same intensity, the same forceful presence that his father had. And my heart would both break and swell with pride. When Theron turned 10, I decided it was time. Time to tell the truth. I sat him down with me on a cold winter night, the fireplace crackling softly, and told him everything. About the castle, about the king, about how we were separated, about how he had come into the world amidst rejection and abandonment. I expected anger, perhaps hatred, but he just looked at me with those dark eyes, too wise for his age, and said, "You are the strongest person I know, Mother. The rest doesn't matter." But it did matter. It mattered because the truth has its own weight, and once revealed, it cannot be ignored. Theron began to ask questions about the kingdom, about his father, about the world he had been denied. I tried to shield him from these curiosities, but he was insistent, determined. "I see a lot of him in you," I said one day, and it wasn't a compliment. It was a worried observation. The years continued their inexorable march. Theron grew, transforming into a young man of 16, tall, strong, undeniably handsome. He had his father's presence, that aura that made people turn when he entered a room. But he had something more, something he had inherited from me. Compassion. He saw people, really saw them, saw beyond the social masks. It was a rare quality, especially in that cruel world. It was then that the rumors began to circulate. The king was sick, very sick. With no legitimate heirs, the kingdom was on the brink of chaos. Several noble factions were already preparing to contest the throne, each claiming to have more right than the other. Civil wars loomed on the horizon. I heard this news with a mixture of bitter satisfaction and deep sadness. Part of me wanted him to suffer, to pay for everything he had done to me. Another part, the stupid part that still held fragments of that old love, ached for him. Theron heard the same news and his face became thoughtful. "He should know," he said one night. "About me." "About the heir he has?" I shook my head vehemently. "No, absolutely not. You don't understand how that world works. They would destroy you, use you as a pawn, and then discard you." He held my hand firmly. "Mother, I am not you. I will not let them destroy me. But he has the right to know. And the kingdom has the right to a legitimate heir." We fought about it for days, but Theron was stubborn, a trait he had definitely inherited from both parents. Finally, against all my instincts, I agreed. But on one condition, I would go with him. I would not let him face that world alone. If they were going to destroy us, let them destroy us together. The journey back to the castle was surreal. The last time I had been on that road, I was fleeing, broken, alone. Now I was returning with a grown son, with a purpose, with a story to tell. The castle gates seemed even more imposing than I remembered. Guards stopped us immediately. "State your name and purpose," one of them demanded. "My name is Theron," my son replied, his voice firm and clear. "And I have come to see the king. I am his son." The silence that followed was absolute. The guards looked at each other, incredulous, then began to laugh. "A bastard trying to pass himself off as an heir?" The captain sneered. "We get one of those a week. Get out of here before I arrest you for imposture." But Theron didn't move. He simply opened his shirt and showed the locket I had given him years ago, the same one the king had gifted me on that distant night. The laughter died. The captain snatched the locket from Theron's hands, examining it with wide eyes. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice suddenly tense. "This belongs to the royal family." "My father gave it to my mother," Theron answered calmly, pointing to me. "Years ago when he banished her while she was pregnant. Now I am here to claim my birthright." The captain looked at us for a long moment, then motioned to the other guards. "Arrest them. We'll let the court decide what to do with them." We were taken not to the dungeons, thank God, but to a fortified waiting room. Hours passed. I heard raised voices outside, heated discussions. The court was in an uproar. Finally, the door opened and a man entered. I recognized him immediately, though he was older, more tired. It was the chief counselor, the one who had always been by the king's side. He examined us carefully, his eyes darting from me to Theron several times. "You," he said finally, pointing at me. "I know you. You were the maid who—" He stopped, comprehension dawning on his face. I nodded in confirmation. "Yes, it's me. And this is my son. Our son." The counselor sat down heavily in a chair, rubbing his face with his hands. "The king is dying. You know that, don't you? He doesn't have much time. And now you show up after all these years with a supposed heir." He paused. "The court will destroy you. Do you understand? They will not simply accept this." "We are not asking for acceptance," Theron interjected. "We are declaring the truth. If the kingdom chooses to reject me, so be it. But my father deserves to know that he is not dying alone, that he leaves a legacy behind." The counselor looked at him for a long time. "You have his eyes, his posture, his voice. If it weren't so impossible, I would say you truly are." "Bring us to the king," I said, my voice firm despite the terror I felt. "Let him decide. He will recognize us, or at least he will recognize his son." The counselor hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I will take you. But be prepared. He is not the man you knew. The illness has consumed him." We followed the counselor through the corridors I once knew so well. Everything seemed smaller, less grand, or maybe I had grown. The maids who passed by looked at us with curiosity and whispers. I recognized a few, now older, but they didn't recognize me. Why would they? I was just another shadow from the past. The doors to the royal chambers opened, and we entered. The room was dark, heavy curtains blocking the light. There was a smell of sickness in the air, of medicines and something deeper, more sinister. Death, perhaps. In the center, on a massive bed, lay a figure I barely recognized. The king was unrecognizable. Too thin, pale, his eyes sunken. But when he saw us enter, something changed in his face. "Elena," he whispered. And that name from his lips after so many years struck me like lightning. I took a step forward, Theron by my side. "Yes," I answered. "It's me." He tried to sit up but didn't have the strength. "I thought you were dead." "I thought," his voice failed. "I'm alive," I said simply. "And I've brought someone for you to meet." I gently pushed Theron forward. The king looked at him, and I saw the exact moment the truth hit him. His eyes widened, his mouth opened in a silent gasp. "It can't be," he murmured. "It's impossible." Theron knelt beside the bed. "I am your son," he said without preamble. "I was born 6 months after you banished my mother. I grew up not knowing who my father was, but now I know. And I came here not to ask for anything, but to tell you that you are not alone." The king raised a trembling hand, touching Theron's face as if he couldn't believe he was real. "My son," he whispered, tears streaming down his aged face. "My son, I denied you. I abandoned you. I abandoned you both. The guilt has consumed me all these years. I tried to forget you. I married as they expected. I did my duty. But I never forgot. Never." I stood there, watching that moment, and I felt the full weight of the years fall upon me. All the pain, all the anger, all the loneliness. He had suffered too. Maybe not as much as I had, maybe not in the same way, but he had suffered. And now, facing death, he was finally confronting the consequences of his choices. "The court will not accept it," he said finally. "A bastard son without documentation appearing out of nowhere. They will claim imposture, they will fight, they will tear the kingdom apart." "Then write it," Theron replied. "Recognize me officially. Make legitimate what was illegitimate. Give the kingdom a chance for peace instead of war." The king looked at the counselor who had accompanied us. He nodded slowly. "He's right. With your official recognition, witnessed and sealed, Theron would have a legitimate claim to the throne. The other factions would still fight, but they would have less legal ground. It would be the kingdom's best chance." "Bring paper and ink," the king ordered, and though his voice was weak, it carried an echo of that old authority. A scribe was summoned, and the document was drafted. "I recognize Theron, son of Elena, as my legitimate and sole heir," the text read. "All rights and duties of the throne are conferred upon him. May God and men be witnesses to this declaration." His hand trembled as he signed, but he completed the gesture. The royal seal was pressed into the hot wax, making it all official. "Done," he whispered, falling back onto the pillows, exhausted. "It is done. Now at least I can die knowing I tried to correct my mistakes." I looked at that man, once so powerful, now reduced to a shadow, and I felt something strange in my chest. It wasn't love, not anymore. But perhaps it was forgiveness, or at least acceptance. What happened between us shaped who I became. It made me stronger, though it almost destroyed me. Without that pain, I would never have found my own strength. He died 3 days later, peacefully, they said. Theron was by his side until the end. Not out of duty, but because he chose to be. Because despite everything, that was his father. And in the end, we all deserve someone by our side when we depart. The kingdom, as expected, fell into turmoil. Nobles contested, complained, threatened. But the document was irrefutable, the seal legitimate. Theron had a legal right to the throne. And when he presented himself before the court for the first time, wearing the royal robes that were his by right, something extraordinary happened. The people recognized him, not just physically, but in essence. He had the presence, the strength, the wisdom a king needs. The coronation was a grand ceremony. I stood in the crowd watching my son receive the crown that was rightfully his from birth. He sought my gaze in the crowd and smiled, and in that smile I saw everything. Pride, love, gratitude, and something more. A promise that he would be different, better, more just. His first act as king was to repeal the laws that allowed the banishment of maids without trial. His second was to establish a fund to support single mothers and abandoned children. He transformed his own story of pain into fuel for change. And the kingdom slowly began to transform under his leadership. As for me, he offered me a place at court, titles, riches. I refused most of it. I didn't need grandeur. But I accepted a small cottage in the castle gardens, where I could be near him but maintain my freedom. There, finally, I found peace. After years of running, hiding, surviving, I could simply exist. Sometimes on quiet nights, I walk through the castle corridors, now open to me. I passed the room where I was humiliated, the corridor where he first kissed me, the gates from which I was cast out. Each place holds a memory, a scar, but it also holds a lesson. I survived. Against all odds, all expectations, I survived. And not only did I survive, but I created something extraordinary. A just, compassionate, strong king. Theron often visits me, bringing grandchildren I never imagined I'd have. They run through the gardens, laughing, free from all the burdens I carried. And when I watch them, I feel that it was all worth it. Every tear, every cold night, every moment of despair, it all led to this peace, this fullness, this redemption. The Queen Mother, the one who orchestrated my fall, died bitter and alone, watching the kingdom be inherited by the very bloodline she had tried to destroy. They say in her last days she begged for forgiveness, but I don't know if it was sincere or just fear of divine judgment. It doesn't matter anymore. Forgiveness is for myself, not for her. There are nights I still dream of him, of the man who was my ruin and my redemption. But they are no longer dreams of pain. They are memories, just that, of a time that has passed, of a person I once was, of a story that ended so another could begin. And in this new story, I am not the victim, but the survivor. Not the discarded, but the victor. But the peace I found in the castle gardens was not complete. There was something still unresolved, a wound that even time could not fully heal. It was on an autumn afternoon, as the golden leaves fell like silent tears, that I received an unexpected visitor. A woman wrapped in a black hood knocked on the door of my cottage. When I opened it, I immediately recognized those tired eyes. It was Alina. She was older, more fragile, but alive. My heart leaped at the sight of her. I rushed to her and hugged her with such force I feared I might hurt her. "I thought you were dead," I whispered against her shoulder. "When the guards took you, I thought I'd never see you again." She stroked my hair as she had done years ago when I was just a pregnant, terrified maid. "I almost died," she admitted, her voice hoarse. "They tortured me for days, wanting to know where you had fled, but I said nothing. I would never betray you." We sat together as the sun set and she told me her story. How she had been left in a damp cell to die, how a young guard moved by compassion had secretly freed her, how she had wandered the forests for years, living as she could, always hoping to one day find me again. And now, with the rumors of the new king revolutionizing the kingdom, with whispers of a maid who had returned in triumph, she had known. She knew I was alive, that I had won. "You saved me," I said, holding her wrinkled hands. "You saved me and Theron. Without you, we would have died on that first snowy night." She smiled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, my dear. You saved yourself. I just gave you temporary shelter. The strength was always inside you." I offered her a permanent room in the cottage, and for the first time in many years, I felt a piece of the past finally click into place with the present. With Alina by my side, I began to allow myself to revisit memories I had buried deep. One night she asked me about him, about the king who had destroyed and loved me in equal measure. "Did you truly love him?" she asked. "Or was it just survival?" The question caught me by surprise. I had spent years convincing myself it was just an illusion, a momentary weakness of a young woman desperate for attention. But the truth was more complicated. "Yes," I admitted finally, my voice barely a whisper. "I loved him. I loved him desperately, completely, destructively. And part of me still carries fragments of that love, even knowing he hurt me irreparably." Alina nodded with understanding. Love doesn't just disappear because the person didn't deserve it. It stays like an invisible scar, reminding us that we were capable of feeling so deeply. It was then that Theron appeared one morning with unsettling news. He had discovered among his father's personal documents a diary where the late king had recorded, in the last years of his life, his deepest regrets. Theron held the leather-bound book with reverence and hesitation. "I don't know if you should read this," he said. "Some things are perhaps better left buried, but I needed to know." I took the diary from his hands and locked myself in my room. The yellowed pages were filled with a handwriting I recognized immediately. Each entry was dated, beginning just a few months after my banishment. The first one read, "Today I ordered her to leave. Elena." The name that haunts every thought, every breath. My mother forced me, the court demanded, the kingdom expected. But watching her being dragged away by the guards, something inside me died. I fear it will never live again. I kept reading page after page of painful confessions. He had written about how he had secretly searched for me, sending spies to nearby villages desperate for news. About how, upon discovering that I had completely disappeared, He had assumed the worst. About how his arranged marriage had been an empty sham, each night beside his wife a reminder that it wasn't me. About how, years later, when his wife died without giving him heirs, he saw it as divine punishment. One entry in particular destroyed me. I dream of her every night. Eleanor carrying a child I will never know. I know she was pregnant. I saw it in her eyes in that last moment, though I was too blinded by cowardice to recognize it. If there is a child, they will grow up hating me, and they will have every right. I am a coward, a fool, a king without honor. The crown on my head grows heavier each day, not for the power it represents, but for the shame I carry. I closed the diary with trembling hands. He knew. He had suspected from the beginning and had done nothing. Part of me wanted to hate those words, to see them as pathetic excuses from a weak man. But another part, the part that still held fragments of that old love, wept for him. For both of us. For everything that could have been if he had been brave enough. Theron found me hours later, my eyes red from crying. He had also read the diary years ago, he confessed. It was one of the reasons he had insisted on coming to the castle, on claiming his right. Not for power or revenge, but because his father, however flawed and cowardly, deserved one last chance at redemption. And you deserve to know, he said, that you weren't just discarded, that he suffered too. But there were more revelations to come. Among the king's belongings, Theron found letters. Letters he had written to me over the years but had never sent. There were dozens of them, each more desperate than the last. In one, dated 2 years after my banishment, he begged for forgiveness. In another, from 5 years later, he fantasized about fleeing the kingdom and searching for me, living as common people far from the obligations of the crown. The last letter, written just a few months before his death, was the most devastating. In it, he wrote, "Elena, if there is any justice in this world or the next, you are still alive. And if you are alive, I hope you have found the happiness I could never give you. I am dying without heirs, without love, without peace. The crown I protected so fiercely will be fought over by vultures as soon as my heart stops. And all I can think is, was it worth it? To trade you? To trade the possibility of a true love for this cold, lonely throne? The answer is no. 1,000 times no." I held those letters to my chest and, for the first time in many years, allowed myself to mourn not just for me, but for him too. For 2 foolish young people who had loved each other at the wrong time, in the wrong place, under impossible circumstances. Fate had given us a glimpse of happiness and then cruelly snatched it away, leaving only wreckage behind. Theron, witnessing my renewed grief, proposed something unexpected. "Mother," he said, "I would like to erect a monument. Not to the king, not to the Alpha, but to the 2 of you. To the story you lived, to the love that nearly destroyed everything but also created something beautiful. A reminder that even in the deepest mistakes, redemption can be born." I initially refused. I didn't want to be remembered as the tragic maid, the discarded lover. But Theron insisted. "It's not about tragedy," he explained. "It's about transformation. About how the worst moment of your life became the catalyst for creating a king who is changing this kingdom. About how pain can generate purpose." I finally agreed, and months later in the castle gardens, a statue was erected. It was not grand or ostentatious. It was simple, elegant. 2 stone figures, a man and a woman separated by a few steps, each looking in a different direction. But their outstretched hands almost touched, eternally close but never connected. At the base, an inscription that I had dictated myself: "From love, pain was born. From pain, strength was born. From strength, a kingdom was renewed." The unveiling of the monument drew crowds. Nobles, commoners, maids, everyone came to witness it. Theron gave a powerful speech about second chances, about acknowledging the mistakes of the past, about building a more just future. But the words that resonated most were mine. I was called to the center, and though my voice trembled, I spoke with clarity. "This statue," I began, "does not celebrate romance. It celebrates survival. Every person here knows pain, rejection, moments when the world seemed to fall apart. I could have let that pain destroy me completely. I could have bowed to the fate they tried to impose on me. But I chose differently. I chose to survive. And from that choice was born not just a king, but a new understanding of what it means to be strong." I looked at the crowd, seeing tears on many faces. Maids who recognized their own struggles in my story. Single mothers who saw hope where before there was only shame. Young women understanding that their worth did not depend on the validation of powerful men. The king who lies dead made terrible mistakes, I continued. He hurt me in ways that took me years to process. But he also gave me the greatest gift, Theron. And through Theron, a chance to transform suffering into legacy. I do not grant him forgiveness because he deserves it. I grant it because I deserve the peace that comes from letting go of hatred. The words flowed as never before. I spoke of the nights freezing in the snow, of giving birth alone in a cave, of the years of running and hiding. But I also spoke of small moments of beauty, Alina saving me when all seemed lost. Theron's first smile, the strength I discovered within myself when there was no one else to depend on. When I finished, the silence was absolute. Then, starting with a single person, then another, then dozens, the crowd began to applaud. It wasn't polite ceremonial applause. It was thunderous, emotional, cathartic. I looked at Alina, who was smiling through tears, at Theron, whose pride was visible. And for a moment I felt something I never thought possible. Wholeness. But even in wholeness, challenges arose. Not everyone in the kingdom was pleased with the changes Theron was implementing. A faction of conservative nobles, led by the Duke of North Vale, began to conspire. They saw Theron as illegitimate, born of scandal, unworthy of the crown. And if they couldn't remove the king, they reasoned, they could destroy his credibility by attacking his origin. By attacking me. Pamphlets began to circulate in taverns and markets. In them I was portrayed not as a victim, but as a calculating seductress. A witch who had bewitched the king, gotten pregnant on purpose, and now manipulated her son to control the kingdom. The accusations were absurd but poisonous, cruel enough to plant doubt. Theron was furious when he found out. He wanted to arrest the Duke immediately to make an example of him. But I advised him differently. Violence creates martyrs, I told him. Let me handle this my own way. He hesitated, worried, but agreed. He had always trusted my judgment. I called for a public hearing in the Great Hall, the same hall where I had been humiliated years ago. The Duke of North Vale attended, arrogant, surrounded by his supporters. He expected to see me intimidated, bowed, pleading. Instead, I entered with my head held high, wearing simple but dignified clothes, with Alina by my side as a silent witness. Duke, I began, my voice echoing off the stone walls. I understand you have doubts about my story, about my character, about my fitness as the king's mother. He smirked, thinking he had won. Indeed, he replied. A woman of your position, of your history, hardly inspires confidence. I nodded in agreement. You are right. I was just a maid, uneducated, powerless, voiceless. Exactly the kind of person your world discards without a second thought. I took a step forward. But do you know what I learned from being discarded? I learned that strength doesn't come from titles or noble blood. It comes from surviving when everyone expects you to die. It comes from raising a child alone, in poverty, without support, and still teaching him compassion. It comes from turning pain into purpose. The Duke tried to interrupt, but I held up a hand. I'm not finished. You call me a manipulator. I who refused all the titles and riches offered by my son. I who live in a simple cottage when I could occupy royal chambers. You accuse me of seeking power through him? Look around, Duke. The changes Theron is implementing do not benefit me personally. They benefit people like I used to be. The invisible, the discarded. The crowd filling the hall began to murmur its approval. The Duke paled, realizing he was losing ground. But I wasn't done. And as for the seduction of the late king? I turned to the audience. How many women here have been blamed for the desires of powerful men? How many have been told they provoked, they seduced, when in fact they were just victims of impossible circumstances? Hands went up. A few at first, then dozens. Maids, seamstresses, peasant women, all with similar stories of being blamed for crimes they did not commit. The Duke looked around, desperate, his strategy crumbling. I bewitched no one, I said firmly. I fell in love. And yes, that love was forbidden, impossible, doomed from the start. But love is not a crime. And the child born of that love? Look at him. I turned to Theron, who was watching from the steps of the throne. Look at the king he has become. Just compassionate, dedicated to his people. If I am a manipulator, then my manipulation has produced the best ruler this kingdom has ever seen. The applause was instant and deafening. The Duke tried to protest, but his voice was swallowed by the crowd's approval. Theron descended from the throne and stood beside me, his presence a silent declaration of support. "Duke of North Vale," he said, his voice carrying royal authority, "my mother has just demonstrated more nobility and character in 5 minutes than you have in your entire life. I suggest you reflect on that before spreading more lies." The Duke had no choice but to bow and leave, defeated. But the victory was not just mine or Theron's. It was for all the women present, all who saw one of their own face down power and prejudice and win through truth and dignity. That night, alone in the cottage, I looked out the window at the stars. Alina was sleeping in the next room, her soft snoring a comforting sound. I thought about all that had happened, how my life had taken turns I never imagined possible. From a discarded maid to the mother of a king, from a victim to a symbol of resistance. But more important than titles or recognition was something simpler. I had peace, true peace. Not the absence of pain or hardship, but the deep acceptance of who I was and all I had survived. The scars hadn't vanished. They never would. But now I saw them not as shames to be hidden, but as medals from battles won. Theron continued his transformative reign. He established free schools for poor children. He created laws protecting workers from abuse. He reformed the judicial system so that even the humblest had a voice. And in every change I saw fragments of our story, of the pain we lived giving birth to policies that would prevent others from suffering the same. The years passed gently. My hair turned grey, my face was marked by time, but my spirit was finally free. Theron married a remarkable woman, not for a political arrangement, but for genuine love. A librarian of modest origins who challenged him intellectually and supported him emotionally. When she was pregnant with their first child, she came to visit me. "Eleanor," she said, using my first name as I had insisted, "I want you to know something. I grew up hearing your story, not the romanticized version, but the real one. About survival, about impossible choices, about turning pain into strength. Your story taught me that women can be more than what society expects. And I will teach that to my child, to your grandchild." I held her hand, moved. "Thank you," was all I could manage to say. But she shook her head. "No, thank you. For surviving, for refusing to be erased, for raising Theron to be the man he is. You have changed this kingdom more profoundly than any warrior king ever could." The birth of my first grandchild was a moment of indescribable joy. When Theron placed him in my arms, I looked at that tiny, perfect face and saw the future. A future where his origin would not define him, where he would grow up free from the chains that had almost destroyed me, where he would be judged by his character, not his lineage. I called him by the name they had chosen, Elian, but I whispered another name in his ear, Hope, because that's what he represented, not just for the family, but for the entire kingdom. Proof that redemption was possible, that stories could have happy endings even after devastating beginnings. Alina passed away peacefully at 86, sleeping in her bed in the cottage. I held her hand as she departed, whispering gratitudes that would never be enough. She had saved not only my life on that snowy night, but my soul. She had taught me that kindness existed even in the darkest places, that humanity persisted even when all seemed lost. We buried Alina in the castle gardens, near the monument. Theron decreed a national holiday in her honor, declaring her a hero of the kingdom, because she was not for grand deeds or battles won, but for a simple act of compassion that had changed the course of history. With Alina gone, I felt the weight of the years more acutely. My body was tired, my joints ached, but my mind remained sharp, my determination intact. There was one more thing I needed to do before allowing myself to rest. I wrote it all down. Every memory, every emotion, every moment of pain and triumph. Not a sanitized biography for royal libraries, but the raw, unfiltered truth, so that future generations would understand that stories of overcoming are not clean fables. They are messy, painful, filled with moments when giving up seemed the only option. When I finished, it was over 500 handwritten pages. Theron read it first, tears streaming down his face. "Mother," he said when he was done, "this needs to be preserved, published, taught in schools, so that every girl who feels invisible knows that her ending is not yet written." I agreed, on one condition. that the profits go to a fund helping women in situations similar to mine. The book was published and became a phenomenon, not just in the kingdom but in distant lands. Letters arrived from all over, from women thanking me for finally seeing their struggles reflected, for understanding they were not alone. Some letters made me cry. Others filled me with pride. All of them reminded me why surviving had been worth it. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how many times you get knocked down. It matters how many times you get back up. How many times you decide that your story doesn't end with rejection, but begins with it. That every scar is proof not of weakness, but of battles won. And that true power lies not in crowns or thrones, but in the ability to turn pain into purpose. I was rejected and left for dead by the Alpha King, but I carried in my arms the heir who would one day restore the name he tried to erase. And today, as I look at the prosperous kingdom my son has built, at the grandchildren running free in the gardens, at the laws that protect the vulnerable, I know that my story, however painful it was worth every moment. Because in the end, a mother's love is stronger than any crown. The determination to survive more powerful than any army, and the truth, no matter how they try to bury it, always finds its way to the light. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for accompanying me on this journey of pain, overcoming, and redemption. Every story I share carries a piece of all the women who have been silenced, rejected, and yet found the strength to move forward. If this narrative has touched your heart, leave a comment sharing what you felt, and if you liked it, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that speak directly to the soul. Your presence here makes all the difference, and together we continue to give a voice to those who never had one.